leave that one now. We are pleased to have the Reverend Canon Alicia Schuster-Weltner with us to talk about the process that we as a parish will go through in our search for a new rector. When we found out that we were facing a new search, we also learned that the diocese does not let churches go through this on their own. Within a week or two, Elaine and I were meeting with Alicia at the cathedral. I believe she could immediately tell that there were two type A personalities in front of her. And I think we were instructed to breathe in, breathe out, in the midst of 100 questions we brought to Alicia that morning. As far as her role in the diocese, get ready, this is pretty amazing. Alicia serves as the Chief of Staff for our Bishop, Rob Wright. As the canon to the ordinary, she assists the bishop with priority initiatives. Her primary areas of responsibility include work on innovations, analytical and longitudinal planning, clergy and parish transitions, clergy leadership development, clergy discipline, property matters, and oversight of the community ministry staff. I'd say she's got a lot on her plate. The part of the job description that has her with us today is parish transitions. Alicia received her undergraduate degree in comparative literature from Mount Holyoke College, her master's of divinity from Sewanee, and has attended Harvard University and the John F. Kennedy School of Government, studying executive education, the art and practice of leadership development. In addition, Alicia gives her time to numerous organizations, including Emmaus House, the Atlanta Girls School, Church of the Common Ground, and the National Charity League. Please welcome the Reverend Canon Alicia Schuster-Weltner.
So have you been on my LinkedIn profile? I once had a rowing parent. My daughter does crew, and we decided to carpool to practice. And before we carpooled, I discovered that the mother of the boy that Sally was going to carpool with had found my LinkedIn profile. And I guess that was her way of approving me or not to be a carpool partner for her son. And we've since become great friends because I looked at her LinkedIn profile as well. So this is the modern world. So thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here. My role in being here right now is to have just one slide, which I'll talk about in just a moment. But basically, to give you a broad overview, I met with your vestry on Tuesday, and as was mentioned with your wardens several times before that. And that work is to make sure that everybody gets everything in place that needs to happen to help a transition flow smoothly. My work today is to connect on behalf of the bishop to embrace the we that we are as the Diocese of Atlanta, and to strengthen the connection between you as a parish and us that's always there, but is even more tangible in a leadership transition time. I've always been kind of amazed that in the church-wide structures, when we have a parish without a rector, they call it vacant. And then, of course, you show up and here are hundreds of faithful people who are the ones who make the church go. So I never like to say we have a vacancy, because we don't have a vacancy. What we have is a transition. So I want to say just 3 things to start. Transition is normal. Transition happens in everything in our lives. From the way we grow and age, to the way our children change, to teachers we have in school, to people we work with if we work in a business. Transition is normal. Number 2, transition is something we know how to do. The grace for you of being part of the Episcopal Church as opposed to Free Will Baptists is that you're not on your own in looking for your next rector. We have processes that we know how to follow and that have worked in the past, and we have the ability to adapt those processes to very large parishes, which you are, so that it goes smoothly. And transition, you heard in my sermon, if you've already heard it one of the 2 times I've preached it already, and you'll hear, this is a preview if you're coming to 11:15, transition is a time of growth. It's not just a time of waiting. One of the reasons that I like to do a forum like this is so that I can give the broad strokes of how the process will work so that everybody can hear it. And I'll give some time at the end for your questions. But it's important, transitions tend to take on kind of a mystique, as if they're secret and only certain people get to know what's going on. And it's real important to know that there are parts of the transition process that are confidential in order to protect the people who are participating in it and the integrity of that process. But the process itself is designed to be transparent where it is appropriate, and communication will be an important part of what happens. So I'm just going to go through the high points of this really artful slide, which my daughter keeps saying she's going to help me redo, but we never get to it. To kind of talk about where we are, we're at the top of this. An opening has been announced. And once the opening is announced, the official kickoff is when I arrive. This is really my 3.5 hours of fame. when I arrive, this is the official kickoff to your search. And when that opening is announced, a lot of things get put into place. Meetings with wardens and vestry. I start to make connections with people who might be good interim rectors. We start gathering together information that we'll need to know to work with your parish. All of that has happened and is happening. The next stage of things will be when your vestry appoints a nominating committee. That is the role of the vestry and the work of the vestry. They're already working on that. And that nominating committee will be the people who do the hard work, along with others, to do things like create a profile of the parish, to oversee the survey of the parish, and to go through the process of screening and interviewing. They will do that helped by a consultant and helped by our office. I want to mention here that as we move into survey and profile, people always say to me in parishes, so what are we doing besides waiting? You say we're not waiting, we're just waiting. There are several places where your input is crucial. And one of those places is when the survey starts happening. There will be a survey that everyone receives. It's something that you do online. If there are people in this parish who can't do it online, there are lots of ways to get that done. And your participation in that, your candid participation in that, is really important, because that's the data that is gathered together to create the parish profile. So the more people that participate, and the more people that participate with candor, the better the information we have that goes into creating a profile. So your role at that time is really, really important. That takes, people always ask me, how long does this process take? And I always say, it depends. I will tell you that the whole profile survey gathering time takes a bit longer in a parish of 1,000 people than it does of a parish of 100 people. But because it's done online, it's computer collated. It's not like somebody has to sit down and collate it all. But those surveys will all be reviewed by the people on your nominating and profile committee. So there will be significant work that goes into that. But as it happens, just know it's really important. So I don't want to give you a timeline on that, but if the survey comes out, you've done this survey, and you're like, where's that profile? There will be lots of information being gathered and filtered through to create that profile. And when that profile is done, most of them are now done online as websites now, you all will be able to see it and share it and celebrate what it says about you as holy innocents. Names received. I like to tell people that there's no mystical place that names come from to become rectors of churches. So in the past, and in some dioceses still, the bishop's office comes up with all the names. That's not what we do. And that's for a number of reasons, including the fact that I don't know every priest in the church, and including the fact that we want people to have access to opportunities to be called. We believe it's a mutual discernment process. So we try to create an atmosphere where an atmosphere of hospitality in searches, where people feel welcome to apply, and it's the work of the nominating committee to do that screening, to do that interviewing, and help filter through it. I will tell you that especially in large parishes, candidates often come not from those who think they're looking for work or a new call, but people who might not even be thinking about it yet, and have to be encouraged. So those of you that travel around, those of you that know other clergy that you think are wonderful, There will be a point in this process when nominations are being received, not before, please, but when nominations are being received, you will have a chance to say, wow, Sally Smith, who I saw when I was traveling in Kansas, is the most amazing preacher and she's running this giant organization. Please talk to her. We get a lot of candidates that way. We also get candidates from things like Facebook posts and seriously, and the way I share with other transition officers around the diocese. And bishops will be talking to each other at House of Bishops, and they say, wow, do you know anybody who might be good for a place like Holy Innocents? So while the church has its own sort of LinkedIn or eHarmony, which is our Office of Transition Ministries profile, I will tell you that in my experience, the best matches come in more creative ways. So all those things will be swirling around and going on. And your nominating committee will be working hard, and I'll be working hard, and others who work with me will be working hard to help you get good candidates. But part of that will also be you suggesting people. Okay? So as you're starting to travel, and as you're thinking of priests, wonderful priests you have known, thank you. I said earlier that if I could speak in soprano, I would be fine, because I can sing, but talking is a little bit low. Keep those names in mind, and when it comes time, you'll have the chance to submit them to the nominating committee for their consideration. Okay? Any questions about that? Okay. Just so people know what happens, your nominating committee will get a bunch of resumes. I have no idea how many. I'm just being honest with you. In the old days, is there anybody in here who has ever been in a search in the Episcopal Church, a committee, whatever? Yeah, good, a good number. In the old days, we had a system that computer-generated matches based on literal numerical answers that you had given as a priest when you created your profile. And so parishes would get sometimes 100 of those matches. Buddy Crawford was actually on the committee that called the Dean of the Cathedral. You would get 100 of these profiles. And those people may or may not be looking for a job. Those people may or may not be qualified in other ways, but they did match. So sometimes when I work with committees now, they say, wow, we had 100 people last time, and this time we have 30. And I'm like, yeah, but these are 30 people who actually want to be here and have the qualifications you want. So we will work to get as many qualified applicants as we can, and your nominating committee will do that initial screening. We have processes we follow for that. We encourage, again, hospitality and generosity in that process, to not make assumptions about people just on paper, but to do phone or Skype interviews with as many people as possible. They then weed from that into people that they will interview, go visit, and eventually bring here to visit with the nominating committee. So this takes, obviously, some time. It's important because we have found over the years that the best way to get a sense of how a priest functions in his or her parish is to visit them. And that visiting is done by teams within the nominating committee who come back and report. And sometimes those visits take a little bit of time to arrange, but they are worth the time and worth the trouble. And get us the kind of reliable data we want to have, as well as first-hand impressions that we want to have, to bring people who will be a good match. I said to the vestry the other night, and the consultant no doubt will say to the nominating committee, part of the reason that we call this a discernment process is that it's not just about picking someone you like. Hopefully you'll like a lot of the candidates. It's about choosing the person who most closely matches, you know, the gifts and talents that the profile says would be best for Holy Innocents. So it's a spiritual process. It's not the same as calling a CEO, though many of the practices are the same. It's a spiritual process that should be undergirded by prayer, even though the process that I require parishes to follow really does read like an HR manual, I'm told, in terms of covering all the bases. But prayer is an important part of it. And during your interim time with your interim rector, you will be doing work, whatever work needs to be done, I don't know what that is, to make sure this parish is as hospitable as possible to whoever the next rector will be. Okay? Questions about any of that? Back here.
How long does this process take?
She asked, how long does the whole process take? It takes between 11 months and 18 months. I doubt it will take 11 months here. Meaning, because this parish is so large, and because the kind of people that are going to be applying will be probably more geographically dispersed, and because you have so many people to get surveys from and information from, it tends to take longer in bigger parishes. You know, we have some parishes that have 100 people on Sunday, and they're finishing in 10 to 11. We have speeded up that whole survey process by having a standard survey, so that parishes aren't spending time picking a survey. Now they can add a few of their own questions to it, but the old days where people made up their own surveys, we were really getting bogged down in that, and we also got sometimes very anecdotal information, and there was no consistency. So that helps that part of the process go faster. But we haven't had one lately, unless there was an underlying issue in the congregation before, that's taken more than 14. But right now, Marie and Elaine know this, and the vestry, All Saints Atlanta, which is also a very large parish, is in their process, and they have just started taking names. So kind of watching how they go will give me a better metric. They have literally just started taking names. Seeing how long that part of it takes will give me a better idea of how it might take here. Because some of your candidates, they're doing some work for you, because some of their candidates may be candidates you want. So, as I look at the names, I'm like, oh, well, that's a good one. So you'll already have a pool, because All Saints is only going to pick one, right? But I'll have a better sense of how that big parish metric works with the timing on interviews when they really get into that. I don't know that quite yet.
From an HR perspective, who does the rector report to ultimately once we get one? Is it to the bishop, or is it to our vestry?
To the bishop.
To the bishop.
Canonically, the rector is the CEO of the parish, and has tenure. So the rector is a CEO with tenure, you know, to use language that most people use in everyday lives. So all rectors, all clergy, me, Will, Joshua, Buddy, Lisa, we're all accountable to the bishop at some level. If we work for a rector as well, we're directly accountable to a rector and then accountable to the bishop. I'm accountable in a very specific way to the bishop. But yeah, the rector works in partnership. That's a good question. The rector works in partnership with the lay leadership and the other clergy. It is not a supervisory relationship between the vestry and rector. When ministry reviews happen, they're called a mutual ministry review, meaning it's a review of not just the rector's work, but the vestry's work, and how everyone is working together to advance the goals of the parish. Back here and then back here.
Who picks the interim, and when can we expect that person to arrive?
The vestry will choose the interim. I have given the wardens some names, and they'll be talking to those people. And I can't guess yet when they'll arrive. It will depend on the choice, quite honestly. But there's usually a gap. In fact, there's always a gap. Luckily, you all have a lot of clergy around to help fill that gap.
Great clergy.
Great clergy around to help fill that gap. But we don't want there to be a 3-month gap, because then people start to get antsy. So I don't anticipate that it will be a long gap, but there always is a gap of at least a month or so, just because of the timing of a rector leaving and the stuff we have to get in place before an interim comes in. We try very hard to allow the end of the current rector's time to be focused on the current rector, and not take away from the goodbyes that have to happen and all that. So I don't show up right after the rector announces. I wait till he's actually gone, as you see. Let me get right back here.
I have the same question.
Same question, okay.
Could you talk about the bishop's role for their interim? Because we've had several interims here, and they've all been very different.
They all haven't been great.
Well, I'll speak to, I can't speak to how interims were handled in the past. I can only speak to how we handle them now. So the process now is that we screen and choose interims for every parish and give them, I try to give them 2. I don't always have a lot of candidates. I don't like have a bullpen full of rectors, interim rectors waiting out there just to parade out. I try to give the vestry 2 to choose from. There are people that have either worked in this diocese before, so we know them well, or people whose references I have checked and that I have already interviewed. We're in close contact with interims during interim times. I talk to interims in most parishes, not every month, but on a regular basis, so that I can just check in and make sure everything's going okay. Sometimes stuff comes up, do you know what I mean? And usually it comes up because it needed to come up. Hopefully you have an interim who has the skills to deal with that. If something comes up and the interim needs help dealing with it, the interim will let me know. They know that's how I work, and will help deal with it. So, you know, the bishop is technically the rector of all, forgive the word, vacant parishes. Now, we have about 30 parishes without a permanent rector. So obviously, we're delegating a lot of authority in order to keep all these parishes running. But we are not disconnected from parishes once the interim arrives. We're still connected. Does that answer your question?
Well, partly, but also it's my sense in having interims here is that the interim comes in to kind of disrupt the...
There was a former school of interim training that said you should disrupt. That is no longer the school of interim training that I place interims from. Does that make sense? Do you know what I mean? So the interims that we are placing currently, to the best of my knowledge and belief, and I've had a very specific conversation with them, are people who are more in the appreciative inquiry model of interim training, which is about helping the parish look at history, helping the parish look at what's currently going on. If there is something that needs to be fixed, this is less common in big parishes, but sometimes they'll go into even a medium-sized parish and they're accounting things that aren't handled right. You know, there's nobody's stealing money, but there's...
Yes, they are.
Right. Or they are, right. But you knew about that before they're in, right? So some of the work of the interim is to make sure those systems are right. If there's a disconnect between the parish and the diocese, the interim works to bring those systems together. So we don't subscribe to the shake 'em up theory of interim ministry. And the people that I've given the vestry to consider do not subscribe to that either. So yeah, that is not a ministry model that I knowingly put in place. Yeah, I think, but it was, you're correct. It was a much touted ministry model in the past. Let me get over here and then Betty.
Something you said earlier makes me ask a crazy question. Will you be our consultant or will there be someone else?
No, I am not. That's not a crazy question at all. I am not your consultant. I'm the canon to the ordinary and the transition officer.
Okay.
But you will have a consultant, and consultants are specially trained, and the consultants, this little artful purple square here in the beginning, the consultant is the one who mostly represents us in this process. So Lang Lowry is the consultant in this process. Lang was with me when I met with the vestry on Tuesday, and will be the person mostly on the ground with the nominating and committee and vestry through the transition.
Thank you.
Betty.
If we do have a name that we'd like to put into play when the time comes, is it advisable to talk to that priest before we put their name into play? I mean, wouldn't that save a whole lot of time?
No.
Well, in some ways that makes sense, but what I usually tell people is just put the priest's name in and let the nominating committee chair do the persuading. Because we've had some cases where if a person had said, "Are you looking?" they would have said no. But then when the nominating committee chair called and they said, "Well, let me tell you all about Holy Innocents," they said, "Okay, I'll look at it." Do you know what I mean? So, and just to note, if you put a name in, that's the end of your work with that name. Like, you don't get status reports on that name, just to be clear. You know, oh, she's still in, or oh, we cut him out because of this. That's the end of your input, is the name, just to be clear. That question often comes up. Any other questions about where we are so far, which is names?
Would the presence of the school change the type of person that we'll look for, or change the desirability of this position, pro or con?
Well, yes. You know, a parish of this size that also has a large school attached to it is rare. So, you know, you're not going to find somebody else who already has a parish of this size with a school of this size attached to it, because I don't think there are any. You will, though, probably get candidates who have parishes with schools, you know, that might be smaller schools, but who understand the dynamic of parishes and school relationships. I don't think it would be a deterrent to anyone who had already been part of a complex system for some other reason. Do you know what I mean? I think it's probably attractive to a lot of people because of some people just love Episcopal schools and want to be a part of them. Some people like the challenge of trying to incorporate school communities and church communities together. Some people have children who they would love to attend that school. So it will work for you almost all the time. I can't really imagine it being a deterrent. Now, if there's somebody who's been ordained, let's say 5 years, and has been in a moderate-sized parish, he might look at that and say, you know, maybe I could go to a parish that has their Sunday attendance, but I don't think I can go to a parish that has their Sunday attendance and that school situation. And I think part of the work that really needs to happen during this time within the nominating committee and the vestry is helping make sure, excuse me, people understand what that really means. You know, what is the interaction of the rector with the school? How much time does the rector spend because of the school? What kind of skills are really needed? Because sometimes people make assumptions about involvement that aren't completely correct. So it's either more or it's less. And that'll be important as the nominating committee and vestry talk to candidates. So yeah, the school is almost always a big carrot, I would think. Over here.
What are the guiding principles for the makeup of our nominating committee? And also then, once the survey profile has been developed or from the survey, how does the nominating committee, are they bound to follow that? Or, you know, and bringing people to the vestry to select that meet the profile? I'm just wondering how the interplay works.
It's a little more organic than that. Let me just rephrase your question in case people couldn't hear. You know, what are qualifications for being on the nominating committee? I mean, how is it put together? And
or like, are we looking for different age, gender?
Right, yeah, I'll mention that. And how much does the nominating committee have to follow what they hear from the survey? Is that what you said?
Yes.
Well, the nominating committee is put together according to guidelines that we give. And we ask the nominating committee to be representative. Representative on a lot of levels. Representative in terms of age, representative in terms of gender, representative in terms of demographic, representative in terms of who this parish wants to be aspirationally. So, you know, most of us in this room look kind of the same, including me. But if there are active people in this parish who look different, and part of what this parish wants to do is increase its diversity, then it would be important to include some of that on the committee. It's more organic than people like me are comfortable with, right? So, you know, they have to meet certain qualifications. They have to have the time to do it. They have to be able to work collaboratively and work to come to consensus. They have to be able to take on the obligation, which is to take information and do their faithful best to speak the truth about that information. It's it's quite a task in a large parish to take all that information and make sure that you are reporting it correctly. But because we use this professional survey, they analyze that and benchmark it against other churches. So a lot of that data is as objective as data gets. So that's not put on the nominating committee the way it would have been in a more subjective survey. But yes, they are asked to take the information they get and do their best to stay faithful to it. But matching a rector to a profile is not like, we've got a circular hole and a square hole and a triangular hole. And the nominating committee, from the surveys, it looks like we want a circle. So, but you can't always tell what a priest is just based on talking to them or what they've done before. It's much more intuitive, which is what makes a lot of people nervous. But what we have found is that if the process is followed, meaning if people take the time to do the work, and take the time to talk to people, and take the time to listen to the sermons when they go, and all of those things, that the intuitive information, undergirded by prayer and influenced by the Holy Spirit, gets us to a place where we can make good decisions. But it's not quite scientific. In some ways it would be simpler, but then it wouldn't be the church, right? So that's the challenge. Any other questions about the candidacy period? There's always a lot of energy around that, so this is totally fine. Okay, I'll just sort of wrap up the steps. The nominating committee's role is to give 3 names to the vestry. The nominating committee is a nominating committee, to be clear. They are not a search committee in what some people consider the way of a search committee, which is we find the person. The nominating committee chooses 3 people, and all of whom they feel would be good rectors for Holy Innocents. They then turn those 3 people, along with all the information and background and data that they have, over to the vestry. And the vestry is presented with these candidates. The nominating committee literally does a presentation of each of these candidates. And then the vestry interviews all the candidates. I always get asked, why do you have 2 groups of people do exactly the same thing? Which is a good question. The reason that we have those 2 groups of people do exactly the same thing is it gives us, once the selection is made, a large constituency of people in leadership in the parish who were part of the decision, know why the person was chosen, and are ready to support him or her. The vestry with whom the person is going to work, the nominating committee who will help the person transition in, all know this person and are committed to working with this person. This model is used a lot all over the church. It's been used in this diocese virtually without stop for a long time. And it gives us the most reliable results. And we all want reliable results, right? So that's why that happens. And the vestry is the one, after interviews, who makes the choice and issues the call with the permission of the bishop. And then there's a whole big celebratory thing that happens after that. And then, just to be clear, when the new rector does arrive, and this will be a while, but just get ready, it's not the time to make a collective sigh and say, oh, thank goodness he or she is here, we're done. It's the time to rally, the time to get going, and the time to be able to support whoever comes here. So that's why I put a star there. The star is not just to say you're happy, the star is to sort of show the explosion of work and joy that happens when a new person comes. Because all too often a new person comes and everybody on the vestry is like, boy, we're tired. And even the Altar Guild folks are like, I'm not dealing with you. So we've had a long time. So keep working together. All right, so what other questions do people have? Back here.
This is a political question.
A political question? Okay.
How likely is it that if the vestry receives 3 candidates, that the bishop would say, no, you can't call whoever you want on that list?
That's a very good question, thank you. She asked, how likely is it that when the vestry receives the 3 candidates, the bishop won't approve one of them? That's almost impossible. And here's why.
Just wanted to hear the answer.
Yeah, here's why. The way I do searches is all application materials have to come in centrally. When I get those application materials, I make a phone call to that person's bishop or canon to the ordinary and make sure that there's no reason I can't send that person forward. Then those materials go to the nominating committee. Now that is not, I don't listen to their sermons, I don't call their mother, I don't, check their references. That is me talking to my counterpart or their bishop and saying, this person's applied for this big parish in Atlanta, their stuff looks good, but, and occasionally they'll say, well, but, he's actually about to leave really suddenly, so maybe hold off on that. I mean, it does happen, And that way, before he even gets, or she even gets to you, I've taken that. The bishop interviews, when parishes get down to 5 or 6, depending on how it goes, the bishop interviews those people before they become finalists. So if the bishop is going to pull someone, and the bishop has, this bishop takes that very seriously. In the old days, that interview was about, are you going to take your church out of the Episcopal Church? That really was what it was about. But with this bishop, it's much deeper. And he has made a decision that he doesn't want somebody to come. So even though their references are fine and their red flag check was fine. So we put all those things in place earlier in the process. So barring, now I sound like the chancellor, barring a change in circumstance, by the time people get to the final 3 at the vestry, the bishop is okay with all of them. And so the formality that we follow is a formality, but it's kind of important to the process, where the vestry comes to their decision and the senior warden calls and says, we're going to call Susan Smith with your permission. And the bishop says, yay, and they go call Susan Smith, and Susan Smith says, yay. So that's how we try to handle that. That's a great question. Thank you for asking. Back here.
So the 3 names that are given to the vestry from the nominating committee, does the vestry have any knowledge of any prior people in that nominating process that they have looked
No,
at?
good question. The nominating committee are the only people that have information about candidates. That's part of the confidential part of the process. They're the ones who have the information. They should not tell you that, and it's to protect the people who are in the process and also the integrity of the process. They make their choice of the 3 because they've done the most work with all those candidates. And they turn over all information about those 3, but they do not turn over information about those they have eliminated.
Can I follow up to that?
Yes.
Does the vestry, is there ever an issue where the vestry does not pick any of those?
In my time, that has happened one time. Well, it didn't even really happen. What happened was the vestry then got into a compensation argument with the person chosen, and it didn't work out. No, I've never had that happen. Now, has it ever happened in the history of the Diocese of Atlanta? I don't know. But I've only been doing this work about 3.5 years, but I've been on the staff watching this work for over 10, and I've never seen that happen. But it could happen, and then we have an issue to deal with. But I've never seen, when they get 3 names, none of them being acceptable. I mean, that would point to something being wrong in the process earlier, which I think the 20-page document I've put in place to manage the process helps mitigate against. But, at some level, anything could happen, right? But we try very hard to make sure that by the time we get to that 3, those 3 are committed, meaning they really think they want it. The nominating committee really wants them. The bishop is okay with them. Everybody understands what the compensation and benefits package is. And so all those things we try to have in place before that final choice so that we don't have any surprises.
Is there anything we do to make sure we don't have those surprises? And I'm thinking about our past issues with the bishop, where we didn't know, everything was not disclosed as it was when I came back here and we were having bishop issues. You remember those?
Oh, you mean with the bishop election?
Yes.
Well, background checks are part, Betty was asking, what if something comes up that we didn't know about? You know, background checks are part of this process, and they're before people make finalists.
That's good.
So hopefully, you know, again, this is not, you know, like if you're joining the Secret Service kind of background check, right? You know, they're not really going down your street and interviewing everyone who's ever known you. But it's a standard background check plus a check with all bishops. So there are phone calls to references, there are conversations with the diocesan people in their diocese. There's credit and criminal and sexual offender status and all that stuff. All that stuff is done before the final finalist. You don't do that. That is a cost, and that is paid for by the parish. So you don't do that on the first 20. You do that as you start to weed down names. But yeah, that is part of it.
What do you recommend that the nominating committee communicate with the vestry and the parish during the process?
Good question. Communication during the process. There should be regular communication there will be a liaison between the nominating committee and the vestry. And so the vestry will get updates on where things are. They won't get names of candidates, but they will get updates on where things are. You know, we're working on the profile, we're starting to get names. We don't have as many names as we thought, so we're going to extend names. We are halfway through getting profiles and we want to get a lot more, or we've gotten so many we can't believe it. So the vestry will be hearing all of that stuff. The nominating committee chair and or the senior warden usually report to the parish on a regular basis. And it kind of depends on the timing, how regular it is, because there will be times, you'll hear a lot as a parish when this all starts with wanting to get surveys filled out and all that kind of stuff. But there will be regular reports to the parish that say things like, you know, we got 800 survey responses. That information is now all being gathered. Keep your nominating committee and your profile committee in your prayers as we work on this. Then somebody can stand up and say the profile is ready, go look at the website, everybody can cheer. Then they'll say, and now we'll be taking names. So start sending us your names. And then they can say we're screening names. So very general information, you know, as we start to screen and interview. But there will be stuff they can't talk about. But again, this is confidential, not secret. So the parish will be kept informed about what's the high points of what's going on, so that they know people aren't just sitting around waiting. Because we want the parish to know that progress is happening and everybody's engaged. Go ahead.
Briefly, you mentioned Lane Larry as the consultant.
Lang Lowry. Sorry.
Lowry.
Yeah.
What are their credentials?
Well, he's asking for the credentials for consultants. Consultants are trained by us to run church processes.
Gotcha.
Do you know what I mean? So some of our consultants also have business experience. Lang happens to be one of those. Lang has run Fortune 500 companies, as well as search processes for me. Lang is a priest. All of our consultants at present are priests. That's not a requirement. We've had lay people who were trained before. But our consultants are trained to manage our process, which has some special parts about it, and has both practical, more business-oriented, and spiritual components in it. So they're trained by us to help manage that process.
Thanks.
And
And Lang's son graduated from Holy Innocents last year. So
yeah,
he's familiar.
Lang had a son who wanted Holy Innocents, so he was a good match for a lot of the complexities of this place. The good complexities of this place. Buddy, what time are we supposed to be done?
Maybe 5 after, so you have time.
Okay. So a few more questions?
What is the basic rules or for the present staff and priests at the church? How do they fit in our process?
She's asking about the role of staff in the process. The role of staff, both lay and clergy, during an interim time is to keep on doing their work.
But can they move forward within the parish, or is that?
They cannot be candidates for rector. Assisting clergy cannot be candidates for rector in the current system in the Diocese of Atlanta. Is that what you were asking?
Well, that was part of it, but
Yeah.
just in the general process.
Yeah, and assisting clergy and all staff do work for the rector. In the absence of the rector, they work for the vestry. When your interim rector arrives, they will work on a day-to-day basis for the interim rector, just as they work on a day-to-day basis for the rector. But our hope in transitions is that there's stability as appropriate. There's no desire for anyone to leave. Certainly not on my part, because stability can be helpful, but change does sometimes happen in transition. But we have no policy that necessitates it.
Policy is what I.
Yeah.
Along that same line, upon the call of the new rector, do the assistants submit a resignation? Is that part of the process?
No, not normally. He asked if clergy assistants are required to resign when a new rector comes. In the old days, I think it was actually a myth, but there was a story that the canons required that. I don't think the canons ever actually required that. On a practical level, if you work for the rector and the rector changes, the rector has the right to say whether or not you stay there. Right? I mean, that's just true.
Yeah, that happens.
And it does happen. I would say virtually always what happens is a rector comes in and there's a mutual discernment between the clergy assistants and the rector about whether or not they're good partners in ministry. So you could have wonderful clergy assistants, which you do, and you could call a wonderful rector, which I hope, pray, and think you will, and they could just have working styles that made them say, you're great and I'm great, but go ahead and start looking. And that happens, and that's okay. But the sort of wholesale come in and get rid of a staff, that virtually never happens anymore. Short of some other thing going on. Do you know what I mean? So it's not a requirement, but a new rector does have the right to choose his or her staff. But most rectors also feel that the stability and the history and the pastoral knowledge they get from people who've been around is very helpful to them. Right. And when I'm working with new clergy coming in, I'm always advocating, take time to get to know each other. That's part of it. Okay, one more, I think.
Sort of on that same line, given the length of time it takes to complete the process, if someone should leave on staff, is that just a vacancy that stays until the new person comes, or?
Yeah, she's asking if someone leaves, if one of your clergy assistants or a lay staff, you have a lot of lay staff, if people leave, can they be replaced? They can be replaced during a transition. If a major person leaves, if a clergy assistant or a major program person leaves, if it's clergy, I generally advise the vestry to be in contact with me to see how they fill that. If it would be on an interim basis or not, it just depends on the situation. Sometimes they stay vacant, and it's a chance to kind of see how that role might be redefined, but sometimes there is a need to fill them. It just depends on what the situation is. There's no rule that they can't be. All right, I think we are done with our time. So thank you. And this will not be your last chance to ever ask questions, although I won't be standing up here again next week. Because I'll be standing somewhere else doing the same thing. I think I'll be in College Park, Georgia next Sunday for their transition, so from one end to the other. But please know that you are in our prayers, and you have lots of partners in this work. And you have a marvelous staff here now, and you have a marvelous vestry, and a marvelous school board, from what I can tell, and head of school who are committed to making this work well, and to this being a partnership, and to this being a good time. All right, so thank you all.
Thank you.